My name is John Bulbus. I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Climate Change and Health Equity at the Department of Health and Human Services. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event, addressing the health impacts of climate change through public-private partnerships. We're very grateful to the Clean Air Task Force for lending us this space and to Google for lending us the live stream, and we're excited for the conversation we're going to be having. What I'd like to do first is to introduce our panelists for the day. We have Google Chief Sustainability Officer Kate Brandt with us, and also the Clean Air Task Force co-founder and president Armond Cohen. And before we get going in the discussion, it's a pleasure to introduce a video that has been pre-recorded. I'll say I'm here as moderator and would be here interviewing my boss, the Assistant Secretary for Health, Admiral Rachel Levine, who we're seeing now on camera. She was unable to be here today, but we're very pleased to have her, the Assistant Secretary of Health, Admiral Rachel Levine, and the Chief Health Officer of Google, Karen DeSalvo, to start us off with a video talking about the health implications of climate change. So let's run the video.
Well, Dr. DeSalvo, how are you today?
I'm great, Dr. Levine. It's so good to see you. How are you?
I'm very well. It's great to see you too. I remember very fondly my visit to Google in your headquarters a number of months ago.
It was extraordinary. Everybody's still talking about it.
Thanks so much.
Impact. Yeah, you're such a leader and such a role model for so many people, including me. So thank you so much for coming out and doing that.
Well, thank you. Of course, you're my predecessor in the same position.
I am. You're holding up the mantle extremely well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I know that you're heading to Egypt to COP27 shortly, and I just wanted to tell you that I'm so sorry that I'm not going to be able to be there, but I know the conversations about this intersection of climate and health are going to be very impactful, and I really wish my schedule would have allowed me to join you all, but we're going to be watching, and I know you're going to be leaning in with Kate from the Google team and have a chance to talk about how the public and private sector can work together to address climate and health. Tell me, for you, what's the one thing that you want to make sure that people take away from the conversations in Egypt at COP27?
Well, it's exactly what you just said, that intersection between climate change and health. And health needs to have a stronger voice in the climate change conversation. Every aspect of climate change impacts our health, both physical and mental. And as important is that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is, in general, it can actually make us healthier. Reducing fossil fuel combustion helps reduce toxic air pollution, saving lives and decreasing health costs, for example, for people suffering from asthma or other respiratory illnesses. So health can actually even pay for climate change. That's one of the biggest takeaways.
It's aspirational. Keep going.
Well, I was going to say, we have seen throughout the country and throughout the world that climate change is not some existential threat for the future. Climate change is now, and the health impacts of climate change are happening right now. People are suffering right now. And I think that history will judge us for the actions that we take or that we don't take. But we can't do it alone. We have to have public-private partnerships to achieve that healthier future. Tech will obviously play a big role, why it's great to have this conversation with you at Google and the federal government. And, I think together it's a great public-private partnership, and we will take action together.
Well, I think the action orientation you have is really exciting, and we feel the same way here. Since you've been out to visit and we've had a chance to chat, that our audacious goal is billions of healthier people. We have this global point of view about how to democratize access to health for people all across the world. And honestly, that can't be done if we're not prioritizing the impact of climate change on health. And so we're thinking a lot here at Google about what can be our role, what can we bring to the table. Of course, it's a major company priority, climate change, and we're now increasingly working on how we can bring our tech tools to bear to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help people not only understand and adapt, but do whatever we can to really slow things down. I just thought maybe a high level for you to remember for us that information is such an important part of what we do. And we consider it a really strong determinant of health. So we've been doing work to think about how some of these consumer facing platforms like search and maps, what is the ways that we can use those surfaces to help amplify the messages of governmental and other partners, but also to help give people some of the insights they need. I mean, so for example, thinking about air pollution, and we know that that's linked to exacerbations of chronic disease, or even the acquisition of chronic disease. And so understanding how we help cities identify their tree canopy and build and grow on that to improve air quality. How do we help people find green spaces and think of the most green route as they're going to travel from point A to point B? We've already been doing work in floods, so helping to alert people when they might be in harm's way, because we know floods have not only acute implications for people with respect to injury, but also disease. And there's longer term challenges like resource constraints on the healthcare system. So making sure that we're helping to equip communities, public health, and also just individuals with the information about how they're going to be potentially in harm's way from floods. And I just mentioned the last thing, which is getting to be such a critical challenge, which is extreme heat. I mean, there are already billions of people affected by it, and we know that it's killing hundreds of thousands of people. And so what we want to continue to do is help people understand where there are heat challenges, particularly as you start to get into microenvironments, and help people understand how they can take refuge, what are the places available to them to go for cooling shelters that public health might put up. And so we know technology is not going to solve this, but we do agree with you that it's a really important part of the puzzle. And we're super excited to work with public health at the national level, the global level, and frankly, the local level as well, to bring that information to people, those data tools that can help public health and individuals understand the potential impacts, to adapt as necessary. And then as I think we all want to do, significantly slow that trajectory by making those important changes in the way we're all behaving every day, and getting to a much more neutral carbon footprint, and frankly beyond. So really excited about the partnerships and the opportunity there, and we're really glad for the chance to get to work with you guys as well as many others around the world.
Well, we are also looking forward to working with you at Google. I think you're entirely right about the importance of tech, the importance of data, and that idea of information as a social determinant of health. That's really interesting. Of course, you are, in terms of social determinants of health and public health 3.0, those were your developments and your programs. So congratulations on that. And this would be a new social determinant of health that we need to consider, especially as it applies to this issue of climate change and health.
Well, good luck with all the conversations. Continue to amplify this important message. And thank you so much for being such a great partner. I'll be cheering you guys on from afar in Egypt and looking forward to working with you beyond.
Absolutely. We'll be there, and we're working with Google, and looking forward to see you again. Take care.
Take care.
So we can have a round of applause for them in their absence. And even in their absence, I think that Admiral Levine and Dr. Salvo have done a really amazing job of laying out the themes for us to discuss in the time that we have together. The fact that there are a lot of intricate relationships between climate change and health. The fact that and that we're in a place now where we're pivoting from discussion, assessment, wringing of hands, to actually having impacts that we can see and needing to pivot to action in an operational way to be dealing with the impacts, in an operational way to be dealing with the decarbonization of the health sector. And that the issues are a little bit different between the United States as a large country and other large countries and the global health picture. So in the large countries, the health sector is a huge consumer of energy and a huge emitter of greenhouse gases. The U.S. Health sector emits about 8.5% of the U.S.'s total greenhouse gases. So there is a real need to be pivoting to action. And of course, that pivot to action takes public-private partnerships. And from a global health standpoint, there's the intricate relationship between global development, energy consumption as a social determinant of health and an underpinning of health, but then the development pathway that leads all of the world to a green and sustainable future. So with that as just some of the backdrop, let me start and again address our panelists, Kate Brandt of Google and Armond Cohen of the Clean Air Task Force. So Kate, start with you. And we know that the private sector is increasingly called on and is increasingly stepping up to take leadership on environmental quality. And this often involves participating in public-private partnerships. Tell us about the successful public-private partnerships that you've seen, that you've been a part of, and share any lessons that you pulled from that experience.
Yes, absolutely. And such a pleasure to be with you both. And what a wonderful video from Dr. Karen and Admiral Levine. So public-private partnership has been absolutely critical to the work that we do in sustainability at Google. And one place that we've placed a lot of emphasis is in working with cities. You know, what we find is that cities are often on the front lines of climate change. 70% of global emissions are coming from cities. And also the citizens of cities are experiencing the impacts of climate change. Dr. Karen talked a little bit about extreme heat. We also know that air quality is a major issue in a lot of cities. So those are two places that we've put a lot of our emphasis. And this work with cities started for us many years ago, back in 2018, when we teamed up with the Global Covenant of Mayors. And now we're also working with C40 to develop data and tools that can be helpful for cities who want to understand their carbon footprint, set climate action targets, and then also do planning around things like urban heat islands and air quality. So two specific examples I'll give, and Dr. Karen kind of touched on them a little bit in her remarks in the video. Tree Canopy Explorer was a pilot initially with the city of LA, and they came to us and they said, we want to plant more trees. You know, LA is kind of notorious for not having a lot of trees. And so we want to plant more trees, but we want to figure out where can we put them strategically so that they will deal with urban heat islands, they will improve air quality. And so we kicked off an experiment, which was to use machine learning to analyze what would be the most productive places that we could be planting trees, and that became Tree Canopy Labs. We brought that data into a larger cities tool that we have called the Environmental Insights Explorer, and now we're working to make that same data available for about 100 cities around the world, and we'll do that by the end of this year. And then the other place is around air quality. So for many years, we at Google have been teaming up with a company called Acclima to put air quality sensors on our Street View cars. So these are the cars that you may have seen driving around. That's how we have Google Maps. We have Street View cars that drive around cities and communities to map them. So we started adding air quality sensors to get street by street level air quality insights. And so now we've teamed up with multiple cities to provide them this data so they have it when they're trying to do planning. So for example, the city of Copenhagen is one of the cities we've been working with, and they wanted to develop thrive zones. They wanted to develop parts of their community where they could really improve air quality, especially where there are a lot of children. And so we were able to give them this data so they could do this thrive zone planning. With the city of Hamburg, similarly, they wanted to work with a local university community to figure out how could they do better air quality planning, and we've teamed up with them to provide this data. So those are just a couple of places where you've seen a really nice intersection point of public-private partnership and then providing these data and insights that have human health benefits and also are addressing impacts of climate.
Wonderful, thank you. Armond, NGOs like Clean Air Task Force often play a catalytic role in public-private partnerships, helping to bring together industry and local governments or larger governments to address issues. How has Clean Air Task Force been a broker of information, a broker to support these public-private partnerships?
So I think we start with the assumption that the private sector is the place where stuff actually happens and investments get made in infrastructure. So we have a very positive view of interaction with the private sector to get good public policy, but also to demonstrate and model good behavior. So specifically with Google, I'd say there are two places we've partnered. One is to work together to leverage Google's buying power and the buying power of its colleagues to create advanced markets for clean energy, which, as I'll get to in a minute, is very closely tied to health. Actually, you've already said that. But getting the advanced zero carbon technologies and zero emissions technologies, because zero carbon technologies are always zero emissions in other respects, getting those commercialized into the marketplace. We had a very unique collaboration with Google, which was to get together, do some joint analysis, or at least compare analysis, and go out and advocate to other corporations to not just buy 100% renewable credits, but to actually decarbonize the supply chain. And that's a little subtle difference. Google and we at the same time had the same insight, which is if you just say that we bought 100% of our electricity matched by 100% clean energy credits, you're not necessarily decarbonizing the grid because you may be actually still relying on fossil fuel and pretty dirty fossil fuels in some areas of the world and the country. So Google and we teamed up to do two things. One was to jointly advocate to other corporations to do what Google was doing, which was trying to get 24/7 procurement of clean energy. So every hour of the year is covered by clean energy, not just sort of matching mathematically. And the second thing we did was team up to advocate together to the federal government, the Biden administration, to adopt a 24/7, 365 clean energy standard, which it has adopted now, and the implementation is on its way. So our partnerships that we've had historically, our catalytic partnerships, have been both working with companies to model good behavior, but also then teaming up to go to the government and advocate jointly. It's always more powerful for a government if you have a civil society organization like ours and a private sector organization going in together than if either one of us are going in alone.
Great. And when you raised the issue of working with Google on Google's own emissions, can you tell us a little bit more? In our office, we're working in public-private partnerships with major health systems, with pharmaceutical companies, with group purchasing organizations to address their own greenhouse gas emissions. Tell us a little bit about what Google is doing with its own, through the sustainability efforts with its own emissions. And if you can, the work that you're doing that you described in public-private partnerships was bringing Google's capability to gather hyperlocal data to help to inform decision-making and to address problems where they're worst. Is there any intersection there with the work that you're doing in your own sustainability and decarbonization efforts to target the benefits to the communities that your facilities exist in?
Yeah, absolutely. And Armond, so great to hear you talk about the work we've been doing with you and your team for many years. And it's been crucial to the work that we've been doing on our own sustainability targets. And the way that we look at our sustainability strategy at Google is it has basically three aspects to it. The first is, how do we lead at Google? How do we set bold climate action targets like our net zero by 2030 target? So that we are leading at home, but of course also partnering as we work to meet our objectives. And then a lot of the a lot of the work that I was just speaking about before around partnering with cities, providing data and tools and insights is part of our strategy on how we want to support our partners. And that's also the work we do with businesses to enable them to achieve their climate action goals. And then the third part of the strategy is how we enable everyone. That we know that individuals also want to be part of the solution to climate change. So how do we do things like what Dr. Karen was mentioning in the video, giving people in Google Maps the most fuel efficient route if it has a similar ETA as a default option that they can have. But when it starts to how we lead at Google, I mentioned our net zero target, and Armond mentioned a really key piece of that is 24/7 carbon-free energy. And there was actually a piece of research that was put out yesterday by the IEA, which really hits home the point that you were making, that 100% renewable energy, this movement of buying clean energy, matching it to how much electricity you're using, is a very important step on the journey to grid decarbonization. But actually to get to deep decarbonization, which is going to be so crucial for global net zero, because it's not only about electricity supply, it's going to be what's powering transportation, what's powering industry, what's powering agriculture. We need to get to 24/7 carbon-free energy. And that's exactly what this research showed, that is the strategy that's going to get us to deep decarbonization. So we've been focusing on that for Google and for our operations. But really, to your point, it's not so much about us reaching our goal. It's about how can we use our buying power, our demand signal, to enable grid decarbonization in the communities where we operate, and all of the benefits that come with that, as we've been discussing, that air quality benefits that will come, from decarbonizing energy. And so we're making good progress. We have about 5 of our sites around the world that are at 90% carbon-free energy. And we're about 66% of the way there. And again, it's, yes, we want to achieve our goal, but for us, it's also really about the partnerships that Armond was mentioning. And now that we've not only seen the US government set this target, we've seen Scotland and Iceland, we've seen cities, other businesses. And so that's what's really going to drive this change together.
Thank you for that. You mentioned carbon-free energy, and Armond, backstage, you reiterated that your organization is the Clean Air Task Force, not the Climate Task Force. And we know that, according to the World Health Organization, 7 million people die every year because of breathing air pollution. A little more than half of that are carbon sources like biofuels and indoor air pollution, but a little less than half of that, still over 3 million, comes from fossil fuel combustion. And we know, so if we decarbonize our energy, that is the enormous health savings that Admiral Levine referred to in the video. And she referred to the fact that the analyses show that achieving the Paris Agreement targets would result in health benefits that have an economic value greater than the cost. That's a very profound fact. So what I would like to do is to turn to you. You've been working on clean air for many years. You've been working in this venue for many years. What have you seen in terms of the development? And that's a fact that often isn't discussed at the table in climate policy, is the health benefits. Why is that from your perspective, having watched these negotiations for so many years?
Yeah, well, we did start out as the Clean Air Task Force. We're doing, I would say, mostly work focusing on carbon, but as you mentioned, John, reducing unabated burning of fossil fuels will inevitably bring along all of the other health associated pollutants. So it was obvious to us from the beginning. Actually, when we started 25 years ago, climate wasn't really a thing. I mean, it's hard to believe, but like in the mid 90s, it was just sort of on the cusp, but it wasn't really a big policy driver. Now it is. So I think that I think health is very much in the debate, and I want to zoom back a little bit here and say that it's a point in the debate for 2 reasons. One is the one we've just discussed, which is if we get more clean energy, we get a lot of the health-related nitrogen, sulfur, toxics down as well. If we retrofit a refinery with carbon capture and storage, for example, we're going to pull out most of the other pollutants, as an example. But there's a more profound connection, and I don't mean to hijack this conversation too far, but I'm going to drop a thought here, which is that using the health analogy, the planet is in pretty poor condition. And some people say, it's a crisis, it's an emergency, it's a health emergency. And it is, but it's also likely to be a chronic condition. That is, I don't think anyone in this room really believes that, we're absolutely certain to hit these targets by 2050, which means we're going to have an ongoing issue of managing climate and managing the health impacts of climate disasters and so forth. But the point I want to leave with you, and I don't know how this fits in with Google's agenda exactly, but the reality is that development is human health and energy is development. So I think in the climate discourse, there's often this thought, that we're transitioning to a clean energy system, and that's true in the North, in the rich world, right? But we just had a panel of Africans who said, what are you talking about a transition? We don't have any energy to begin with. And that means that we have the inability to power sanitation or good health or clean drinking water, or we can't really grow, an economy, basically, if we have no energy. The average sub-Saharan African consumes 1/50th per capita of what we in the North do. So that's a kind of a meta issue about health, climate, and clean energy. And I think the long game here is you don't just need clean energy, you need a lot of it. And that's where I think our partnership with Google has been looking forward to say, how can we get as much clean energy as possible on the planet? And that means not just using the wind and solar and batteries that we have today, but commercializing the next gen to fill in those valleys when wind and solar isn't available, or to decarbonize fuels. So I really look forward to working with Google and others on this. It's only one company, you can't change the world completely, but what I'd say, Kate, is that Google is a really respected thought leader, and it's over and above what you do. It's what you model, and also, frankly, your analytics are so good, and your charts are always so great and understandable. So again, I didn't mean to take us too far afield, but if we're talking about global health, we are talking about energy, and especially if health impacts are going to be exacerbated by climate change, the way that you deal with, I mean, air conditioning is really important to deal with heat waves. It's not going to stop the heat wave, but it is going to mean that fewer people die. And likewise with the ability to recover from natural disasters, or even to build seawalls to make sure that you're not flooded. These are all very energy intensive activities. So the whole thing kind of comes back together. It's clean energy, health, not just in the short term in the sense that you mentioned, John, of the nexus between emissions and lungs, but this long-term issue of making ourselves more resilient to what inevitably will be a much more chaotic and hotter planet.
Thank you for that. A lot in that comment, of course, about, and part of what I'm hearing in the comment is that with health not part of the conversation in climate policy, that whole centrality of the nexus of human development is about health. Human development is about providing the energy, the information, the technologies in order to allow everybody on the planet to enjoy the quality of life that the richest people on the planet are enjoying now. We're getting towards the end of our session, and I think there's been so many different topics that we've talked about, and I'm going to end with just to allow you to freeform, and as we think about this next year, so we're in we're just having the first year of the COP26 health program. We're just starting to figure out what would a COP that really integrates health throughout the conversation, throughout the various things that go on at a conference of parties, that talk about adaptation, that talk about loss and damage, that talk about mitigation, that talk about clean energy pathways, that talk about the energy transition. Thinking ahead a year, what would you like to see either happening at the COP, or what would you like to see the role of your organization be in a COP28 that integrates health better?
Oh, that's such a good question. I really appreciate the comments that you're making, Armond, about we need to be systems thinkers. We need to look at the connection between these issues, between health, between climate, and also how we're both dealing with trying to deal with mitigation, but also adaptation, as you're saying, that this is also going to be an issue. It's here today. It's getting worse. So I think that systems thinking is critical. And I think the role that we really want to play at Google is how can we be a technology partner? How can we bring forward data and tools and insights that can be really helpful to having this more integrated approach, whether it's some of the things I talked about around, insights around where to plant trees, insights around air quality at a community level so that we can really address it for children, for the people that it's going to matter to most, or better insights around how do we deploy clean energy in ways that are deeply decarbonizing and also improving air quality. So I think that systems thinking and then bringing data and insights so that we can take action. And I think a lot of what this COP is about, I think what next year is going to be about, is ambition to action too. That a lot of important goals have been set. Now we need to act upon them, but we need to act upon them thoughtfully and in a much more integrated and holistic way. And so I think having the dimension of health, making sure that we're also talking about people, that connection between people and planet is so critical. So I think that's how I'm thinking about next year.
Thank you very much. Armond?
Yeah, I mean, John, you asked the question, where is health in this discussion? And reflecting on that, I have to say that my aspiration, everyone says this is all about people, right? But the debate gets pretty abstract. It's about tons and, whatever. I think a year from now, I'd like to be having a more integrated conversation about what does it really mean to have a planet of 8.5 billion people living at a living standard that maybe isn't quite at the OECD level, but a lot better than where folks are right now, and integrating that into a vision of energy. I mentioned before the meeting that the IPCC scenarios, according to a recent paper, all of them assume that Africa basically gets no more energy than it has today per capita, and that Southeast Asia actually goes backwards in terms of conservation beyond. This is like a time bomb sitting in plain sight, And what that means is that basically you're condemning people in the developing world to poor health because it means they can't build the infrastructure for a health system or for air conditioning or for clean water or anything else. And so I think human development, health, and energy and climate need to be brought back together in a more realistic way that's really looking at the size of the energy demand that's going to result if we're going to have a healthy planet. And that's it seems like a really roundabout discussion, but I think there's no way to make this really a people-centered transition without it. So my hope is this conversation gets a little bit more real about what it really means to have a low-carbon energy system that promotes public health. So, maybe we'll get there.
Thank you for that, and hopefully through the engagement of health ministries through the Alliance for Transformative Action for Climate and Health at the WHO's launch, maybe that can be a place where some of these conversations can really take hold and be brought in at COP28. With that, I'm going to thank the audience that we have here. Thank you for being here today. Thanks to the audience that's online. Thank you, Kate Brandt. Thank you, Armond Cohen. And thank you for your organizations for allowing us to have this conversation today.
Thank you.